Australia's biggest polluters will be forced to reduce emissions by 4.9% each year under new reforms to the Safeguard Mechanism's climate change policy. Joining us live now is Alison Reeve, the Grattan Institute's Energy and Climate Deputy Program Director. Alison, thanks for your time. Do you welcome the reforms?
Gabby, I think it's good that we're getting some momentum behind this sector. One of the things that, to know about achieving Australia's climate targets so far is that the heavy lifting has largely been done through avoided land clearing, which is really the agriculture sector, and rooftop solar, which is households. So the point of this reform is that it means that the industrial sector are going to need to start doing their share of the work that's needed to get to the 43% target and then to net zero.
What do you make of the cap? The government says the cap at $75 a tonne is in a bid to shield business from the risk of future cost spikes and create stability going forward. Do you think it's fair?
Look, I think the cap is there largely because people are, some stakeholders would be worried about that extra cost. What's interesting is that that cap is actually lower than the average internal carbon price that Safeguard companies use at the moment. We did some work last year where we looked across all of the companies who are participating in Safeguard, and we looked at which ones were disclosing that they were using an internal carbon price, and we found that the average was actually more like $96. So I think that this cap will definitely have the effect of keeping a lid on the cost of the scheme. But it's interesting that a lot of companies are already assuming that they're going to have to pay more than that anyway.
Do you think it's a good first step?
Yes, I do think it's a good first step.
Okay, look, the Coalition argues that it's not, that it's too drastic. What do you make of their position?
Well, I guess the question you have to ask is what's the alternative? It's not really possible to get to the 43% target without the industrial sector starting to reduce its emissions. And the other thing we need to remember is that both sides of politics are committed to a net zero target by 2050. Industrial assets last a really long time, and so we've really only got, for these large facilities, one or maybe two investment decisions between now and 2050. And if those decisions aren't made at the lowest possible carbon emissions that they can do, we have no chance of hitting that target. So, in the absence of any other, of a credible alternative to get emissions down at the same rate, I really think that, this is the option that's on the table. I thought it was interesting in your package earlier, as you were saying, that business groups are largely behind this. I think they're a bit tired of having to debate this or that or the other. They just want some rules so they can get on with things.
How would you like to see the government implement the scheme?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of parts where I think they do have a big challenge to get it ready by the 1st of July. There's a lot of things that they need to work out. One of the things that I think will be critical for investors and for shareholders in these companies is to get a fair bit of transparency around what the carbon obligation of each of the companies participating in the Safeguard is. We sort of, if you're going to buy shares in BHP or an alumina company or Woodside or whoever else, you really need to know, what is the future carbon cost going to be? So I would like to see more data published by the regulator every year on what the forward carbon burden on each of these companies is.
Okay, what about the transition into renewable technology? Do you think the government should actually be spending more in that sector?
So they've said that they're going to set $600 million aside for particularly their trade-exposed facilities under the Safeguard mechanism to help them fill that risk gap. And I think that's particularly important because, as I said before, if you've only got one decision point between now and 2050 and the technology you need isn't ready, you are going to need help to close that risk gap. So I think that, having that fund there is really great. It's really hard to say whether that's the right amount of money or not. I think we'll just have to, suck it and see, I guess, just see how things work out. The other thing I think we're going to see here, though, is that this is going to create momentum within the sector. And what we've seen in other sectors is once you get the ball rolling, things actually turn out to be cheaper and easier than they were originally predicted to be. So that momentum towards companies looking forward at what their carbon liability is and looking at what their options are is actually going to be really important.
Alison, Reeve, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.